Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2021 horror film Malignant. This film surprised me. Uh, I did have some issues with it. For one, I think the storytelling in the first and second acts are a little too generic at times. I think some of the writing in terms of the humor doesn't really work that well. But once this film gets to the third act, this movie is quite the spectacle. And it does things when it comes to the narrative and the structure that are just completely gonzo and crazy. And as a result, I ultimately have to say that I enjoyed the film. And it's one of those movies where I really do feel that a lot of the mixed reviews tend to come from some of the aspects of it that I liked about the film. I like the fact that it eventually morphed into more of a old school gonzo crazy horror film in the vein of Reanimator. I like that about the film. I know for a lot of people they didn't like that because they felt it didn't match the tone that was going on previously, or it didn't go to a place that they were expecting. And I think that's a genuine positive for the film, that it didn't go to where a lot of people were expecting that it would go to. I love the fact that it goes there. If it was just another generic haunted house possession movie, or slasher film, then I think that it wouldn't really stand out that much. And I wouldn't even say I would be that big of a fan of it. I would honestly be more let down by the movie if it went the more traditional route. So the film was directed by James Wan, and James Wan is a director who I've always felt is immensely talented. And this film is no exception when it comes to his filmography. This movie has some absolutely fantastic, terrific, just really uh, jovial and crazy, energetic direction. There's a lot of sequences in this film that are really high energy, just absolutely insane. And James Wan is a director who can really pull that off. On top of that, he's also a director that can pull off the more slower, more suspenseful, more subdued kind of sequences. And he works well with his cast and his actors. He really knows how to showcase practical effects or big, crazy, over the top sequences of gore or action. And he did such a good job throughout this film that I would say it's probably one of the best films that I've seen this year when it comes to a pure directing standpoint. There were even moments where his direction reminded me of prime Dario Argento, and I am a huge fan of Argento. And there were other aspects of it that reminded me of really popular, well known action directors. Because there was a whole sequence in the end in the police station that was right up there with some of the other iconic action sequences that I've seen in films in the past few years. I mean, it reminded me of an action sequence from the John Wick trilogy. Like, it was that impressive when it comes to the way that it was shot and the way that it was put together. So, James Wan deserves one hell of a good kudos and a great amount of praise for his direction in this film. It was nice to see him go outside his comfort zone a little bit not do just another possession ghost movie. And it showcased his talents in ways that a lot of his other films didn't, because it showed him taking some risks and doing something different and then excelling at it, which honestly just makes him even more of an impressive director. I want to see his action movie. Really, I want to see James Wan direct an action movie now after uh, his police station sequence in this movie. The screenplay by Kelly Cooper, it's not amazing, but it is definitely an above average screenplay overall. Where the script kind of falters is in the writing for some of the characters. There were a lot of supporting roles that I just didn't really give a shit about, like the sister, even the lead girl. There were some moments where I think the writing was a little clunky, especially near the end. And well, the twist, which spoilers, is something that just blew me away. I mean, I will never look at people walking backwards the same way again. I mean, that sequence where she's freaking out in the prison and her hands rip the back of her head open and this fucking tumor comes out of her head and it grows a face, and her arms bend backwards and her legs bend backwards and she starts walking towards the fucking camera and just wrecks everybody in the fucking prison. That is a absolutely wild, inventive sequence with some really great um, writing in terms of how it just subverts and plays with expectations. I did not see that coming, and I've seen a lot of films. I've seen a lot of horror movies, and I had an idea that the creature that you saw in the opening of the film was going to be connected to the lead. I had I figured that out early on, but I did not even remotely see the twist coming, that she was in some ways the killer, in a way that just completely left me gobsmacked and my jaw straight on the floor. So that's something I have to give the writer an absolute ton of credit for, is really surprising me. But that being said, there's a lot of stuff in the first and second acts that's just very generic, kind of plays out in a way that you're just like, okay, I am intrigued, but I'm not consistently engaged with things. I'm not as drawn in with all of this as the script could potentially really be. It's one of those things where it's not bad, but it definitely could be a lot better in that regard. Because if you take away the Gonzo's crazy third act, I don't think that this would be that great of a film, and I really wouldn't even say that I was ultimately a fan of it, because it's just early on there's just people want to talk about the tonal shifts, and a lot of people talk about the third act and how that doesn't match very well. I think there's a lot more going on with the tonal shifts in the first and second acts. And once it gets to the third act, then the shift in tone works better, and it's not so jarring, because there's a lot of moments in the first and second half where I'm just kind of, is this supposed to be funny? Is this supposed to be comical? Or is this supposed to be eerie or creepy or suspenseful in some way? And I don't think it really nailed that balance in the first and second half of the film. There are some other twists too that I think were really well done in terms of the writing. For instance, how the killer was hiding inside her attic the entire time, and the person from the tour guide that was kidnapped by the killer falls through the ceiling while the cops are there at her house. Like that was definitely something that really surprised me. And I also like the way that the killer is ultimately stopped. I like how he gets trapped in a part of her mind. She gets the strength to put him in a corner, like he had been doing with her for this whole time. But I don't really think the line delivery or the lines themselves are really as strong as they could be. It comes across as a little corny. And so there are some lines of dialogue. Speaking of corny, there's a lot of lines of dialogue, and the attempts for humor, they're very cornball, very cheesy, very uh ironic. You know, it's trying to be like ironically bad in terms of the dialogue at times, and I'm never really a fan of that kind of humor. So there's just some clunky bits here and there of the script that really prevent it from being amazing, but when it is on its A game, it's astonishing. The third act, when the reveal happens, and even some of the other moments early on with the killer and how it uses a trophy and turns it into a weapon, and how genuinely brutal the kills are, and how the killer winds up going through the underground in Seattle, and there's a nice little foot chase with the police officer and the killer. Those are some genuine highlights as well when it comes to the script. But there's just other stuff too, like, I mean, it was way too easy for the sister to find the videotapes of the organization by just going to the abandoned institution in the middle of nowhere on a cliff face somewhere. She faced zero resistance, and that was a really nice setting that could have been something really creepy and atmospheric and eerie, like having the killer there too, and her having to stay one step ahead of it and escape with the tapes before the killer gets her. But you never really had a moment like that. She just drove to the abandoned institution, snuck in, got the tapes, got back, and was watching the tapes with her mom like it was something that was as easy as opening a bag of chips. And it's just like that was a huge missed opportunity when it comes to the writing for me. But all of that being said, it's still a decent script. The concept here, which is a mix of something like Basket Case and trying to think of another thing that it might apply to, but really a Basket Case is the main thing that comes to mind. You have elements of something like Basket Case, and then you throw in some other sort of red herrings in terms of a slasher or a supernatural uh, thriller, and then you knock the audience on the floor with the third act, which is just absolutely bonkers in terms of the the way things unfold, uh, and the gore and the just creativity of it all. It's just something that, in my opinion, will definitely go down as one of the most memorable moments in horror in the past 5 years or so. The cast, I think the cast does a nice job as well. Annabelle Wallis as Madison. I know she's gotten a lot of praise, and on one hand, I can get it because there are some moments where the performance is really strong and really stellar. But then there's other moments where it's a little stilted, and it kind of comes across as not as authentic as I think Juan was intending it to be. And I think a big part of that is not necessarily due to her limitations as an actress, but due to the lines of dialogue that she's given. But I also think it might have to do with Juan's direction at times too. Like the moment where it's supposed to be a big heroic moment where she stands up to her brother essentially, and tells him that she's not going to be controlled by him anymore. The line delivery is a little too flat, at least for me personally. I didn't really buy it. It didn't really feel like a strong moment. And that's supposed to be a big moment in the film, and I really think that's a moment where Juan could have been like, hey, I want it to come from the heart. And I want it to feel real and genuine. I don't want it to feel and appear as if you're trying to force it out there. And I thought that line was. I thought it was relatively forced. And that's just me personally. And there were a few other moments where it was just kind of like, eh. Maddie Hasson. I'm sorry. I think I butchered her last name there. Yeah, it's Maddie Hasson as Sydney Lake, her sister. She was there. I think my issues with her more have to do with the writing than anything else. George Young, uh, I thought he did a nice job. I thought he did a good job as Detective Kokoa Shaw. On the other hand, though, Michole Briana White as Regina Moss, his partner, who is just a dollar store version of Wanda Sykes, did not care for that performance. I thought it was just really not as charismatic and as funny as I think the writers or the director really intended or thought it was. It was one of those things where you're like, this is supposed to be like the comic relief, and it just wasn't funny. And I didn't like that character. So a character that's supposed to be lovable and a bit of a goof and somebody that you enjoy seeing in these outlandish situations really was just a total failure in terms of the performance and in terms of the writing. Um, you have a few other actors and actresses um, who are in the film, but really that's the main cast that you're dealing with. I mean, you have Louisa Kelly who plays Jane Doe, Serena, the mother of Madison and Gabriel. Gabriel, I want to give ton of credit for the physical performer Marina Mas I think it's Mazepah, who plays the physical form of Gabriel. She's a contortionist and she's an acrobat, and she really just absolutely floored me, because a lot of the stuff with Gabriel doing his thing with the body of Madison is done for real. There's a little bit of CGI at times, but a lot of it is done for real with Marina. And that's just something that is just still so astonishing and awesome that James Wan decided to go that route. He deliberately wanted to have as many scenes as he possibly could with Gabriel being an actual performer, as somebody who is a contortionist or somebody who's a capable of doing a lot of these movements for real. You have other actors. I mean, you have Zoe Bell, who played. I think she played the main badass chick in the prison who's trying to be super intimidating and gets her ass handed to her. I think that's Zoe Bell. Zoe Bell's been in a lot of things. Um, she's fairly well known in the genre for playing a lot of different sort of roles in TV and film. But the main cast is Annabelle Wallis, Maddie Hasson, George Young, Michole Briana White. Those are the main people, the main players. And yes, while I think Annabelle, I keep fucking up her name for some reason. Annabelle Wallis, I think that her performance could be a bit better in this film. It's still a good performance. I'm not going to sit here and say that she did a bad job because she didn't. It's a very difficult role, too, because there's a lot of different complex elements to it. Now, the film also excels when it comes to other things like the cinematography by Michael Burgess. This is a gorgeous looking film at times with the red lighting and other uses of shadow and other forms of light. The action sequences when they are there are really well lit, really well set up, really well put together. The editing is excellent in this film. It's a definite standout by Kirk Morey, especially in the film's gonzo third act. The slaughter in the police station, the slaughter in the prison cell, all of it is just really well edited. The sequence with the cop chasing Gabriel on foot, that is another sequence that's really well put together when it comes to the editing. It really is an exemplary bit of editing. And it's another instance of an editor that manages to really conform to the style of the filmmaker, of the director. And the cinematography also seamlessly blends in with what James Wan is trying to do with the film as well. And the practical effects, when they are there, are really impressive. There's a bit of CGI, but there's a lot of practical effects. There's a lot of blood that's actually on the screen in a physical form and not done with a computer. There's a lot of genuine gore at times. And then, of course, you had the physical performer doing a lot of the stunts. And that just adds to a lot of the authenticity of the events of the film. It just makes things feel much more visceral, much more powerful, because of the fact that you have a lot of this stuff that's done for real with camera tricks or stunt performers or practical effects. Now, the score to me is another mixed bag, similar to the screenplay. Joseph Bishara, he's a pretty talented, decent composer in his own right, but I just didn't feel this score fit the film most of the time. I know that the film in a lot of ways is a throwback to 80s horror, like Basket Case and so on, but the score just felt too big for my tastes. Like it was blaring a little bit too loudly, like it was just a little bit too much. I know the film is over the top at times and insanely so, but the score just felt like it was overcompensating for things sometimes. And I feel that it really could have benefited from taking a couple steps back in some scenes. Because there's some scenes that aren't really full of gonzo crazy moments, and they still have this really loud, over the top score, and that really doesn't fit very well. So I just feel that it could have had better balance. But the moments in the film where the score fits, it really does succeed in making those sequences even more fun and even more lively uh, and thrilling. But there's just a lot of moments where the score just seems a little too out of place for me. So that's why it's a mixed bag for me personally. But it still has a lot of nice notes to it. And it was nice to see a composer not necessarily playing it as safe as a lot of other composers have been doing lately with horror. It didn't have as much moments with the score where you could barely even hear it, or it was just droning background music. So even though I feel that it was a little too over the top at times, I got to give it a lot of credit as well for breaking the mold, not necessarily the mold entirely, creating a new mold or breaking new ground, but breaking the current stale mold of horror, where it actually is delivering something that is more bombastic and in your face instead of just being in the background and something that you could just tune out really easily. But anyway, I definitely would recommend Malignant. I think if it looked like something that might interest you, it's definitely something that I would recommend you checking out. And I would say it's one of the better films that I've seen in 2021, and definitely one of the better horror films that I've seen in a while. But I just feel that it's a little too inconsistent at times, and like I said, if it wasn't for that third act, it wouldn't really be that great, let alone that good. And a lot of the film hinges on that. And I know that has happened before with other movies, but it just felt like other films that really do go all out in the third act after kind of slowly building things up did a better job in terms of making the build up feel more special. And I think that's really the big failing or the big point with this film where it falters is just the first and second acts. I had some fun with elements of it, but they never really felt that special to me. And I really do feel that there was a lot of missed opportunities when it comes to the way things unfolded in the first and second acts. Like I said, just have that a one really crazy, wild, inventive, scary, eerie sequence in the abandoned sanitarium or hospital or whatever the hell it was. That's really all that you really needed. Instead of just wasted that entire environment for a sequence that lasted for maybe a couple minutes. So there's a lot of stuff like that in the film where you just feel kind of cheated and kind of like you're just there for the ride instead of wanting to be on the ride. Really invested fully in the ride. But once it, gets over that first turn, it gets up the lift hill and then really starts going, then you're screaming your head off and you're having a blast and you're loving it. And the third act is why this film is something that I would say really does merit a cult status. And it also is the reason why it's such a damn shame this didn't do that well when it comes to the box office. Because we need more horror films like this that are trying to be something different or trying to put a spin on an old idea instead of just shoving old franchises back into our faces with little to no new changes and just a little bit more when it comes to a fresh coat of paint. And it just sucks that a film like this just didn't do well. And Hollywood, at least today, the way that they think, their mindset is all about money. So if something doesn't make money, if it underperforms, they're going to think that audiences don't want more films like that. So it's a shame. It's not surprising considering the way trends are going right now. I guarantee something like Scream 5 is going to make a shit ton more money than this film. As much as it pains me to say that, but I'm hoping that it does find an audience eventually if it hasn't already, and I really do hope that its fans do really keep the fire burning for this film, because as flawed as it can be at times, that third act is something genuinely awesome, and something that I think really does deserve a hell of a lot of spotlight. But anyway, thank you for watching my review of Malignant, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.